The answer to the question posed in the title of this video is yes. Yes, it is okay to mourn celebrity death online. And yes, it's okay to do each component activity. It's okay to mourn online. It's okay to mourn celebrities. We're gonna talk about why, but also the reasons some people think those things are not okay. In the wake of recent high-profile deaths like David Bowie, Joan Rivers, Robin Williams, Nelson Mandela, Alan Rickman, and the victims of senseless violence like those at Sandy Hook in San Bernardino or Norway, we see an outpouring of grief and mourning online, from people close to the deceased and from those, by all accounts, not. Communicating with friends and family members and about our feelings and current events via social media is increasingly a part of day-to-day life in this part of the world. And as much as we may avoid it, death is similarly a part of day-to-day life. So alongside a growing desire and capability to communicate online about culture, politics, and art, there's a growing desire and capability to mourn, not just for those physically and interpersonally close to us, but for those whom we feel close, given their presence in culture, politics, and art. But for many people, adopting social media into the mourning process at all is anathema. Most famously derided is the funeral selfie, a much maligned flash-in-the-pan social media backlash trend which saw grown adults uncritically judging teenagers for their admittedly somewhat awkward missteps in navigating a difficult situation. HuffPo said, "Funeral selfies are the latest evidence the apocalypse can't come soon enough." And Business Insider described the narcissistic impulse to take and post a gratuitous photo. I can only hope that since posting them, these authors have grown embarrassed, because as Katie Waldman for Slate and Caitlin Doughty for Jezebel point out, the funeral selfie is not primarily an effect of narcissism or poor judgment. It's an effect of daily normal habit colliding with what Doughty calls our tragic disengagement with the reality of death. She writes of teenagers, "Our cultural traditions have failed them, and selfies at funerals are one of their only outlets to ritual and mourning in the age of the smartphone." To judge teenagers who mourn using social media is to judge a culture which has disengaged from the larger conversation about death and dying. Whatever apocalypse HuffPo fears is signaled not by teens dealing clumsily with tragedy, but by a world that would sooner judge than converse with them, perhaps as a result of its own inability to confront death. As Western culture has become more secular, and as Doughty again points out, after the rise of the death and funeral industry, we have less opportunity to directly and practically confront mortality and fewer traditions which guide us through the process of grieving. Even Sigmund Freud held what would become the popular Western notion about grief, that it is a deeply personal process. Extrapolated from this notion are beliefs that grief is private, a sign of weakness, something one must get through, something separate and which should never collide with our day-to-day lives out of respect and deference. This is a position held by many people, and it seems everyone who laments the mourning of both celebrities and close friends online. Online mourning, Dylan Byers at Politico writes, makes death feel cheap. One minute someone is posting about the dinner they had last night or the YouTube video they just watched. The next minute they're writing something like wow or heartbroken, as if it's impossible to have several emotions at one time. Writer Zadie Smith in the New York Review of Books chalks the desire for teens to commemorate a loved one on Facebook using acronym-laden internet vernacular up to poor education. They feel the same way as anyone would, she writes, they just don't have the language to express it, as if her language is somehow closer to expressing the real honest truth of whatever grief is objectively. Chloe Mall on Vogue writes, an Instagram feed is just too public a platform for meaningful mourning, as if the ether of public places is too diaphanous to transmit the density of sincerely felt emotion. In reality, grief is, and often should be, communal. It's not a sign of weakness, but an admission of loss, a sign of humanity and empathy. One cannot get through it because grief never ends. Grief is not separate from day-to-day life, but a part of it. To say one cannot or should not love pizza and grieve for the departed at the same time is to disrespect and deny the truth of both grief and pizza, and possibly the departed. Most likely they would want you to enjoy pizza. If you would prefer to grieve privately, that is your right, and no one can fault you. There is no one correct way to mourn. Historically, the communal sharing of grief online is much more like the bereavement process as it has existed at other times and places, save for this brief lacuna where we've been brought up to think of it as weak, shameful, and private, not even given the choice. A vast majority of the judgmental screeds concerned with online mourning hold without question or interrogation the assumption that grief is solitary and the internet and the people on it are frauds. In a piece for the New York Times, Hannah Seligson renders the fake versus real grief dichotomy as display versus distress. On The Atlantic, Megan Garber sees endless misguided hand-wringing over what happens when mourning becomes, quote, as it were, hashtag content. Garber calls those who bemoan the outward display of grief online the grief police. And the grief police are never in stronger show than when people dare to mourn online for a celebrity. If the impulse to view social media mourning as fraudulent display versus earnest distress holds for when its subject is close to those posting, we can only imagine how much this attitude is compounded by the passing of a beloved musician, actor, or statesperson. If mourning becomes hashtag content when posted about personal friends and family members, then what unholy abomination does it become when they don't even know the person? So let's just get some things straight. One, if you're sitting down at your computer like, gonna let some people know why their feelings are wrong, maybe do some deep introspection as to why you feel your commentary on the emotions of others is required or helpful. And two, distance or non-involvement does not preclude emotional investment. To make some crass but hopefully even somewhat clear comparisons, do you get mad when your favorite sports team loses? You don't play for them. What about when your favorite MasterChef competitor gets cut, or when a Walking Dead or Game of Thrones character dies? Should people pack in their disappointment in these situations because they don't even know those people? Part of being a person in the world is allowing oneself to be affected by a multitude of things within it. Many things will have great impact, and some of those things will be larger than life entities in the public eye. If you want to deny that artists, heads of state, entrepreneurs, and performers can have great emotional, aspirational, philosophical, or intellectual impact on others, we can disagree fundamentally, and then this conversation is over. But if you allow that such a thing is possible, you also have to allow that such impacts can make people feel like those public figures helped them become themselves. This is why it's sad that David Bowie died, and why I'm allowed to be sad and tweet about it. I didn't know David Bowie, but at times it felt remarkably like David Bowie knew me. And what's more important, at times it felt like he knew who I wanted to be. This, I'm sure, is true for people who mourn Oscar de la Renta, Amy Winehouse, Andy Warhol, Glenn Frey, Harper Lee, Princess Diana, and John Lennon, at their passing and forever after. Losing a creative hero is like losing a great teacher, someone who knew things about the world you didn't, but showed them to you in this inviting way that encouraged you to become yourself. I like to think that we're all capable of understanding why the loss of such an important figure might result in grief.
Make your lives extraordinary.
But okay, you may say, no one denies that you may feel bad, but why do you have to advertise it online? And my response is that we've already covered this, but to reiterate, the mechanisms by which we confront death in the West, especially in Europe and America, are few, far between, and rather solitary, shrouded in duty and discretion. In a piece for Newsweek by Kyle Chayka, Gravestone creator David Quiring calls Americans death deniers. But in its ongoing success at crystallizing previously diasporic communities, the internet has shown that contrary to our received wisdom, it is cathartic and even healthy to grieve online as a community. The denial is confronted and despair is shared. Liz Namer writes for Wired that, quote, it's okay to just turn off our phones and let ourselves mourn. But as Megan Garber writes, taking to the internet to share and cry and commiserate is now part of how we cope with loss. It is what we do, but it is also, just as importantly, what is done. Phones and the internet are in no necessary way the opposite of mourning. Saying the internet is not an appropriate context for mourning indicates there is some list of places which are appropriate. And if you have access to this list, I would love to see it so that I can know where I am allowed to mourn. Which, remember, one is doing always after the death of a loved one. Am I no longer allowed to go to the library or the park? What about bowling alleys or the mechanic? Writing for NYU, Jeffrey Gorer says, "We are at a loss and embarrassed when we do consciously meet a mourner." He writes about how we feel we must distract people from mourning, encourage them to seek new experiences and move past it, when really the opposite is true. During mourning, the person is more in need of social support and assistance than at any time since infancy and early childhood, Gorer writes. And at the moment, our society is signally failing to give this support and assistance. The cost of this failure in misery, loneliness, despair, and maladaptive behavior is very high, he writes. By judging others for mourning, by telling them that their feelings are wrong or misplaced, not authentic or earnest, most of all when they're expressed online or for celebrities or both, is one not distracting themselves from mourning? Not from a specific instance of mourning, but from mourning as a whole, which, as we've learned, is costly. So what do you guys think? Let us know in the comments, and I will respond to some of them in next week's comment response video. In this week's comment response video, we talk about your thoughts regarding cocktail glasses. If you want to watch that one, you can click right here or find a link in the doobly-doo. A huge thanks to everybody who came to the fandom and marketing panel and the PBS Digital Studios meetup at South by Southwest. It was great to meet some of you, to see some of you again, to say hey, hang out, see all of y'all's shining faces in the Lone Star State. Of course, my time in Austin was super brief, so if I missed you, I'm super sorry. Maybe next time. I flew in back to New York this morning at like 4 o'clock in the morning, so I feel crazy. And speaking of y'all, the tweet of the week comes from Oh So Ordinary, who points us towards an Atlantic article making a case for y'all. And the reason I bring this up is because for a while now, I have been thinking about making the switch at the end of videos to saying not what do you guys think, but what do y'all think, because it seems more inclusive. It's also a lot more fun to say. So I don't know, maybe Oh So Ordinary gave me the final nudge and permission to do that. Maybe we'll start. And finally, PBS Digital Studios is actually doing a network-wide survey of its audience because we want to know more about you and who you are and what you're interested in and where you get your internet things from so that we can figure out how to serve you better and all that other fun stuff. So if you have an extra couple minutes, it would be super rad if you wanted to take that survey. There is a link to it in the description. We have a Facebook, an IRC, and a subreddit, links in the doobly-doo. And last but certainly not least, this week's episode would not have been possible or good without the very hard work of these folks who want you to enjoy pizza forever and always.